Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. That way, you'll always stay connected to our stories and never miss the next adventure. The Galactic Military Academy on Vexmora didn't believe in comfort. That was the first thing anyone noticed when they arrived at the sprawling fortress of steel and stone that dominated the planet's northern continent. The second thing they noticed was the screaming. Not the fun kind of screaming, mind you. Not the whoops and hollers of cadets celebrating a victory or blowing off steam. No, this was the soul-crushing, hope-draining kind of screaming that drill instructors had perfected over millennia, of making young recruits question every life choice that had led them to this particular circle of hell. The drill yard itself was a monument to suffering. Don't picture, just know that it stretched out for nearly 2 kilometers of pure misery. Obstacle courses that looked like they'd been designed by someone who genuinely hated the concept of happiness. Climbing walls that scraped the sky. Mud pits that were definitely colder than they needed to be, because of course they were. Combat simulators that could replicate everything from Arctic blizzards to volcanic eruptions, sometimes both at once, because why not make everyone equally miserable? And standing in the center of all this manufactured suffering, arms crossed and looking like he'd just bitten into something sour, was Drill Commander Threxnall. Threxnall was a Varkon, which meant he stood roughly 3 meters tall, had 4 arms that ended in claws that could shred durasteel, and scales that gleamed like polished obsidian. His species had evolved on a death world where everything, and I mean everything, tried to kill you before breakfast. They'd developed their military culture as a survival mechanism, and by the time they joined the Galactic Council, they were very, very good at it. They were also very, very good at being absolute hard cases about training. Move! 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 Threxnall's voice could probably be heard from orbit. My grandmother climbs faster than this, and she's been dead for 30 cycles. The cubs, because that's what they called the young recruits, regardless of species, scrambled over the obstacle course like their lives depended on it. Which, technically, they didn't. But try telling that to a bunch of kids who'd been screamed at for the past 6 weeks straight. There was little Nyx, a phoenix from the smaller moons of the outer reach, all fluffy gray fur and ears that were frankly too large for his head. He was 8 cycles old, which translated to roughly 9 in Earth years, and he was currently dangling from a rope obstacle like a very sad, very furry ornament. His arms shook with effort, his breathing came in panicked gasps, and if you looked closely, which Threxnall definitely did, you could see tears forming in his enormous eyes. Pathetic. Threxnall stalked closer, all 4 arms gesturing at the struggling cub. What happens on the battlefield when you can't climb, recruit? I'll tell you what happens. You die. And worse, you get your squad killed. Nearby, Weapons Master Krillmoth clicked his mandibles together in what might have been agreement, or might have been the insectoid equivalent of a laugh. It was hard to tell with Krillmoth. The Chitara had compound eyes that saw in about 16 different spectrums, which meant he could literally see fear, which meant nobody could hide anything from him, which meant he was even more terrifying than Threxnall on a bad day. The Phoenix shows elevated stress hormones, Krillimoth announced, his voice like metal scraping against metal. Heart rate at 190 beats per minute. Muscular fatigue at 83%. Conclusion, inadequate. Thanks for that, thought every cub within earshot. Really helpful. Vel, a Aquarian with scales that shifted from blue to green depending on his mood, currently a nauseous gray-green, was faring slightly better on the next obstacle. He'd made it halfway up the climbing wall, which was something, except his hands kept slipping on the holds, and he was pretty sure he'd pulled something in his shoulder. "Keep climbing, recruit!" Threxnall had moved on to him now, because the thing about having 4 arms is that you can gesture threateningly at multiple failures simultaneously. In battle, the enemy doesn't care if you're tired. The enemy doesn't care if it hurts. The enemy just cares about killing you. Motivational speaking was clearly not Threxnall's strong suit. And then there was Umba, a Gelatari, whose entire body was composed of a translucent, bluish gel held together by a semi-permeable membrane. Umba was currently wobbling, there's really no other word for it, through a tunnel crawl, leaving a trail of slime behind that probably violated several health codes. The Gelatari were a peaceful species, known for their philosophy and art, and whoever had decided that Umba should attend military academy had clearly never met Umba. "Faster, recruit!" Krillmoth was clicking again, his antennae twitching. "A slug moves with more purpose." Umba wobbled faster, which just made the wobbling more pronounced. This was the Galactic Military Academy. This was where the various species of the Council sent their best and brightest to learn the arts of war, strategy, and combat. This was where future commanders were forged in fire and discipline. This was also, if we're being honest, where young kids were having absolutely terrible times and trying very hard not to cry where anyone could see them. The current class consisted of 26 cubs from 18 different species. They ranged in age from 6 to 13 cycles, which was the standard entry age across the galaxy. Some were there because of family military tradition. Some were there because their planets required service. Some were there because they'd shown aptitude on placement tests. And some, like Nyx, were there because they'd been promised it would be an adventure. Spoiler alert. It was not that kind of adventure. Nyx finally lost his grip on the rope and fell 1.5 meters into the mud below. The impact drove the air from his lungs with a wet whoomph, and for a few seconds he just lay there, staring up at the gray sky of Vexmora, wondering if it was too late to become a botanist instead. "Up!" Threxnall loomed over him, all 3 meters of disapproval and scales. "On your feet, recruit!" Nyx tried. He really did. But his arms were shaking. His legs felt like they'd been replaced with jelly. No offense to Umba. And when he put weight on his left leg, something in his knee sent up a sharp spike of pain that made him yelp. He looked down. Blood was seeping through his fur where he'd scraped his knee on something sharp in the mud. It wasn't a serious injury, not really, but it stung, and it was bleeding. And Nyx was 8 cycles old and very, very far from home. He started crying. Not loud, dramatic crying. Just quiet tears that mixed with the mud on his face. The kind of crying you do when you're trying very hard not to cry, but your body has other ideas. "Oh, for the love of—" Threxnall made a disgusted sound. "Are you actually crying, recruit?" "Crying? Do you think the enemy will stop shooting because you have tears? Do you think battles pause for emotional moments?" Nyx tried to speak, to apologize, to explain, but all that came out was a hiccuping sob. "Get up, or get out, recruit!" Threxnall's voice somehow got even louder. "If you can't handle a simple obstacle course, you have no business in this academy. Get up now, or pack your things and go home to your parents." And here's the thing about that particular threat. It should have motivated Nyx. It should have lit a fire under him, made him push through the pain, made him prove he belonged there. Instead, it just made him cry harder. Because going home sounded absolutely wonderful right now, and he hated himself for wanting it. The other cubs kept moving, kept training, because stopping meant becoming the target of Threxnal's attention, and nobody wanted that. Vel finally made it over the climbing wall. Umba wobbled out of the tunnel. A group of 6 cubs from various species completed a sprint drill, their breathing harsh and ragged. This was normal. This was how training worked. You pushed through the pain, through the fear, through the homesickness and exhaustion. You became harder, stronger, better. At least that was the theory. Threxnal was about to launch into another tirade. He had a whole collection of them, organized by theme and level of humiliation, when Krillmoth's antennae suddenly twitched. "New arrival," the insectoid announced, his compound eyes shifting to track something at the edge of the drill yard. "Unscheduled." Threxnal turned, all 4 arms dropping to his sides in a posture that somehow conveyed intense annoyance. What now? What now, indeed? Walking across the drill yard, seemingly oblivious to the fact that you absolutely did not interrupt drill sessions, was a human. Now, humans were relatively new to the Galactic Council. They'd made contact about 30 cycles ago, and they were still in that awkward phase where everyone was trying to figure them out. They were bipedal, which was common enough. They were mammalian, which was less common but not unheard of. They were persistent, adaptable, and had a disturbing tendency to pack bond with literally anything that held still long enough. They were also, according to Threxnal's personal assessment, entirely too casual about military protocol. The human approaching was female. You could tell by the longer hair pulled back into what humans called a ponytail. She was short by military standards, maybe 1.6 meters tall, with skin that had a warm brown tone and was dotted with small dark spots that humans apparently called freckles. She wore a standard Earth military uniform, which looked almost comically informal compared to the battle-rated armor most species preferred. The uniform was neat enough, but she'd rolled up the sleeves, and she was carrying a worn backpack that clinked softly as she walked. She was also smiling, which was immediately suspicious. Nobody smiled in the drill yard. The drill yard was where smiles went to die. "Commander Threxnal?" The human stopped a respectful distance away and offered what humans called a salute, a gesture involving touching their forehead that was supposed to show respect, but mostly just looked odd. "Lieutenant Winona, reporting as assigned. I'm your new Cultural Exchange Liaison Officer." There was a pause, a long pause. The kind of pause that happens when someone says something so absurd that your brain needs a moment to process it. "My what?" Threxnal's voice was dangerously quiet. "Cultural Exchange Liaison Officer," Winona repeated, still smiling. Still smiling. "I'm here to facilitate better understanding between human and non-human military methodologies, share best practices, and promote cooperative—" "I requested a tactical consultant," Threxnal interrupted, his scales somehow bristling despite being, scales. "Someone with expertise in advanced combat scenarios. Someone who could help refine our training protocols for modern warfare." "Right, well, funny story about that. I did not request a babysitter." The smile dimmed slightly but didn't disappear. "I'm not a babysitter, Commander. I'm a veteran of the Earth Defense Forces with 20 cycles, years of active service. I've served in 3 conflict zones, trained 2,000 soldiers, and I hold advanced certifications in—" "I don't care." Threxnal crossed all 4 arms, which was a neat trick and looked very impressive. "This is the Galactic Military Academy, not a cultural exchange program. We are training warriors, not hosting tourists." "I understand that, Commander, and I'm here to help." "Help?" Threxnal made it sound like a curse word. "You want to help?" That's generally what liaisons do, yes. Then, help by leaving. Report to administrative services. They'll find you a nice desk somewhere far from my drill yard. Winona's smile finally faded, replaced by something harder to read. With respect, Commander, my orders come from the Galactic Council itself. I've been assigned to this facility for a minimum of 3 cycles to observe, assess, and provide recommendations. So unless you want to take it up with the Council, and trust me, they're very invested in this cultural exchange program, I'm staying. The temperature in the drill yard seemed to drop about 10 degrees. Threxnal and Winona stared at each other. Well, Threxnal stared down, since he was considerably taller. But Winona didn't back away, didn't look intimidated, just stood there with her worn backpack and her rolled-up sleeves like she had every right to be there, which, legally speaking, she did, which made it so much worse. "Fine," Threxnal finally growled. "You may observe. From the designated observation area. Do not interfere with training. Do not speak to the recruits. Do not—" A sob from behind him interrupted the lecture. Nix was still on the ground, still crying, still bleeding from his scraped knee. In all the excitement of the human's arrival, everyone had sort of forgotten about him, which was probably a relief right up until it wasn't. Threxnal turned back to the small cub. "Recruit, I gave you an order. On your feet." Nix tried again. He genuinely tried. But his injured leg wouldn't hold his weight, and he collapsed back into the mud with a pained whimper. Unacceptable. Threxnal was building up to something truly spectacular in the way of verbal devastation. If you cannot follow simple instructions, he's hurt. Everyone turned to look at Winona, who had taken several steps closer and was now staring at Nix with an expression that looked almost concerned. "He's in training," Threxnal corrected coldly. "Pain is part of the process. He's bleeding. A minor scrape. He's a child. He's a recruit." Winona's jaw tightened. "He's both." And then, before anyone could stop her, before anyone even realized what was happening, Winona walked onto the drill yard. Let me be clear about what a violation this was. The drill yard during active training was sacred ground. You didn't interrupt drills. You didn't interfere with instructors. You certainly didn't walk up to a recruit who was being disciplined and— Winona knelt down in the mud next to Nix. The entire drill yard went silent. Cubs froze in mid-exercise. Krill Moth's antennae went rigid with shock. Threxnal's scales did a thing that they probably shouldn't have been able to do. "Hey there," Winona said softly, addressing Nix directly. "That looks like it hurts. Can I see?" Nix stared at her with huge, tear-filled eyes. He'd never seen a human before. She looked strange, with her flat face and tiny ears and complete lack of fur. But her voice was gentle, and she wasn't yelling. And that alone was so novel that he found himself nodding. Winona examined his knee with careful hands. "Okay, not too bad. We'll get you fixed up. Hold still for a second, okay?" She swung her backpack around and opened it, rummaging through the contents. Out came a small white box with a Red Cross symbol on it, a human first aid kit. She pulled out an antiseptic wipe, and Nix flinched. I know, Winona murmured. "This might sting a little, but then we'll put on a bandage, and you'll be good as new. Ready? Deep breath." She cleaned the wound quickly and efficiently. Nix whimpered, but held still. And then, and this is the part that made Threxnal's eye start to twitch, Winona pulled out an adhesive bandage covered in colorful images of Earth dinosaurs wearing party hats. "There we go," she said, applying it gently. "All better. You're very brave. You know that?" Nix stared at the bandage, at the silly dinosaurs. at this strange human who had just helped him. Something in his chest cracked, and he started crying again, but this time it was different. This time it was relief and exhaustion, and 6 weeks of held-back fear all coming out at once. And Winona, without hesitation, pulled him into a hug. "Lieutenant!" Threxenol's voice could have shattered glass. "Step away from the recruit immediately. You are interfering with—" He didn't get to finish that sentence, because Vel, who had been watching from the climbing wall, suddenly dropped down and ran over, just abandoned his post and ran straight to the human and the crying cub. "Hey!" Krillmoth clicked sharply. "Return to your station, recruit!" Vel ignored him, completely ignored him. He dropped down next to Winona and Nyx, his scales shifting to a concerned purple. Then Umba wobbled over at surprising speed. Then a small crystalline cub named Tixa. Then 2 more, then 4, then— "Stop!" Threxenol roared. "All recruits, return to your positions immediately. This is a direct order." Nobody moved. Well, no, that's not accurate. They moved, all right. They moved toward Winona. Within 30 seconds, the entire class of 26 cubs had abandoned the drill course and congregated around the human. Some were pushing in for hugs. Some were just standing close, seeking the proximity of someone who didn't yell. Little Nyx was still being held, his face buried in Winona's shoulder. Umba had wrapped a portion of themselves around her leg in what was probably meant to be comforting. A small avian cub had literally perched on her shoulder. Winona, for her part, was trying to give attention to all of them at once, which was challenging, but she was making a good effort. "It's okay," she was saying, her voice calm and warm. "You're all doing great. You're all so brave. Yes, I see you. Hi there. Easy, easy. There's enough room." Threxenol looked like he was about to have an aneurysm. All 4 arms were shaking. His scales had gone a shade of red that probably indicated extreme stress, or possibly the onset of a rage-induced stroke. "This is mutiny," he hissed. "This is disgrace. This is a disaster," Krillmoth finished, his compound eyes fixed on the scene. "Complete training protocol collapse. Disciplinary structure compromised. Military order non-existent." They both turned to glare at Winona, who was now sitting in the mud, completely surrounded by alien children, some of whom were crying, some of whom were just leaning against her like she was the only solid thing in the universe. She looked up at the instructors, a small dinosaur bandage visible on her own hand where she must have scraped it in the mud, and said, with that same gentle smile, "So, should we talk about your teaching methods?" And that, as they say, was when things got interesting. The thing about Threxenol was that he'd been a drill instructor for 28 cycles. 28 cycles of breaking down recruits and building them back up into soldiers. 28 cycles of perfecting the art of strategic intimidation. 28 cycles of never, not once, having someone question his methods to his face while sitting in the mud surrounded by his entire mutinous class. His brain was having trouble processing it. "Teaching methods," he repeated slowly, like he was tasting the words and finding them poisonous. "You dare to—" "I dare," Winona interrupted, which was probably not wise, but she did it anyway. "Because this—" she gestured at the cubs clinging to her. "This isn't normal. This isn't what happens when training is going well." "They're weak," Threxenol snapped. "They lack discipline. They need to be hardened. They're terrified." Winona shifted slightly, trying to redistribute the weight of about 6 different species draped across her lap. "There's a difference between tough training and trauma." "Trauma!" Threxenol made it sound like a fictional concept. "War is trauma, Lieutenant. Battle is trauma. If they cannot handle training, how will they handle actual combat? By being prepared, not broken. Krillmoth clicked forward, his antenna twitching with agitation. You have been here for less than 10 minutes. We have trained thousands of recruits. Your assessment is premature and unwelcome. Maybe. Winona carefully extracted Nyx from her shoulder and set him down gently, though he immediately grabbed her hand. But I've also been reading your facility reports for the past 3 months. Want to know what I found? Not particularly, Threxenol growled. Winona pulled out a datapad with her free hand. The cubs were not letting go of the other one. Over the past 6 cycles, this facility has logged 18 psychological breakdown incidents requiring medical intervention. 32 recruits terminated their training early. 5 suicide risk assessments. And your completion rate is 68%, which is the lowest in the academy system. The silence that followed was deafening. Those numbers, she continued, her voice still calm but with an edge. Now, those aren't the numbers of a successful training program. Those are the numbers of a system that's breaking kids faster than it's building soldiers. War breaks everyone, Threxenol said, but there was something different in his voice now, something almost defensive. Better they break here, in safety, than break in battle where it costs lives. Or, and just hear me out here, we could train them without breaking them at all. Impossible. Is it? Winona looked down at the cubs around her, then back up at the towering Varkon. You know what humans learned over centuries of warfare? That the best soldiers aren't the ones who've been beaten into submission. They're the ones who fight for something, who trust their squad, who have something to protect. You're training them to survive alone. But nobody survives alone. Vel spoke up then, his voice small but steady. She helped Nyx. You just yelled. I was providing motivation. You were being mean, Umba wobbled, which was apparently their species' version of standing firm. You're always mean. Threxenol's scales bristled. Return to your exercises immediately. All of you. This is your final warning. Nobody moved. They stayed clustered around Winona like she was a shield, like she was safety, like she was the only thing standing between them and the abyss. And that's when Base Commander Felnax arrived, her diplomatic robes swishing as she hurried across the drill yard, looking at the scene with an expression that suggested she was already composing a very long report in her head. Someone, she said tiredly, want to explain why training has completely stopped and why there's a human in the middle of my drill yard? Everyone started talking at once. Commander Felnax held up one slender hand, and everyone fell silent. The Nuvari were known for their diplomatic skills, which mostly meant they had perfected the art of the "I'm not angry, just disappointed" expression that worked across species barriers. She was tall and willowy, with pale silver skin and large dark eyes that currently swept across the scene with the weariness of someone who knew this was going to involve a lot of paperwork. One at a time, she said. Commander Threxenol, you first. Threxenol drew himself up to his full height, which was considerable, and probably intended to be intimidating. This human has disrupted training, undermined my authority, and caused a complete breakdown of discipline. I request her immediate removal from this facility. Noted. Felnax turned to Winona, who was still sitting in the mud, with cubs attached to her like barnacles. Lieutenant Winona, your perspective? Winona carefully stood up, which was challenging since several cubs refused to let go and just came up with her. Nyx was holding her hand. Umba had wrapped around her leg. A small reptilian cub named Vix was literally hanging from her backpack. I observed training methods that I felt were counterproductive and potentially harmful, Winona said diplomatically. When a recruit was injured and distressed, I provided basic first aid. The reaction from the other recruits suggests there may be systemic issues with the current training approach. Systemic issues, Threxnell repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. She's been here for 10 minutes, and she's diagnosed systemic issues. Actually, I've been reviewing your program data for 3 months, Winona countered. The 10 minutes just confirmed what the statistics already showed. Felnax pinched the bridge of her nose, a gesture she'd learned from humans, ironically enough. The statistics being 68% completion rate, 18 psych incidents, 32 early terminations, 5 suicide risk assessments. Winona met the commander's gaze steadily. With respect, ma'am, something isn't working. The Cubs are weak, Threxnell interjected. The current generation lacks the resilience of... Every generation thinks the next one is weaker, Winona interrupted. We have records of people saying that going back thousands of years on Earth. It's never actually true. What changes is how we train them. Krillmoth's antennae twitched. Your species has been in the galactic community for barely 3 decades. The Varkon have perfected military training over millennia. You presume to lecture us? I presume to offer a different perspective. Winona shifted her weight as Umba adjusted their grip on her leg. Look, I get it. Tough training has its place. But there's a line between challenging and damaging, and I think maybe that line got crossed somewhere. Your opinion is irrelevant, Threxnell growled. These Cubs must learn to face adversity, to overcome fear, They're already facing adversity. Winona's voice rose slightly, the first crack in her calm demeanor. They're children, away from home, being screamed at by adults twice their size, told their failures every single day. They don't need more adversity. They need tools to handle it. Felnax watched the exchange with the analytical gaze of someone who was calculating political ramifications. The Human Cultural Exchange Program was a council initiative, heavily funded, with multiple species watching to see how it played out. A complete failure in the first week would be problematic. On the other hand, undermining established military training protocols could set dangerous precedents. On the third hand, metaphorically speaking, since Nuvari only had 2, the statistics Winona cited were accurate, and the Council had been receiving complaints. I propose a compromise, Felnax said finally. Lieutenant Winona, you claim the current methods are flawed. Commander Threxnell, you maintain they are necessary. Rather than debate theory, let's test practice. Both of them looked at her suspiciously. Lieutenant, I'm authorizing you to work with this class for 2 weeks. You may implement whatever training methods you deem appropriate. At the end of that period, the Cubs will undergo the Night March evaluation. Threxnell's scales went rigid. The Night March? That's an elite assessment. Adult soldiers struggle with that course. Exactly. Felnax smiled thinly. If the lieutenant's methods are superior, the Cubs should perform well. If not, she shrugged delicately. Then we'll have concrete evidence that traditional approaches are necessary, and we can adjust the exchange program accordingly. It was a trap, and everyone knew it. The night march was brutal, 20 kilometers through hostile terrain, in darkness, carrying full gear, with simulated enemy encounters. The current passing rate for Cubs was maybe 20% on a good day. Winona understood what was happening. This was a setup for failure, a way to discredit human methods and send her packing with documentation to back it up. But she also understood that she didn't have much choice. She either accepted the challenge or admitted defeat before even starting. 2 weeks, she said slowly. Full control over training methods? Within safety parameters, yes. No interference from other instructors? Felnax glanced at Threxnall, who looked like he wanted to argue but was enjoying the prospect of watching Winona fail too much to object. Agreed. Commander Threxnall and Weapons Master Krillmoth will observe only. And when, not if, when, these cubs complete your night march? Winona asked, her chin lifting slightly. What then? Then, Felnax said carefully, we'll discuss incorporating elements of your training philosophy into the broader Academy curriculum. But, Lieutenant, I must be frank, the odds of all of them completing the night march are astronomical. I don't need astronomical, Winona said quietly, looking down at the cubs still clustered around her. I just need possible. Threxnall made a sound that might have been a laugh. You have 2 weeks to turn this collection of frightened younglings into soldiers capable of the most demanding assessment in our program. This should be entertaining. Oh, it will be. Winona's smile was small but determined. Just maybe not in the way you expect. Felnax clapped her hands once. It's settled then. Lieutenant Winona has full training authority over this class for 2 weeks. Evaluation will be the standard night march protocol, no modifications. Commander Threxnall, please transfer all relevant training schedules and cub files to the lieutenant. With pleasure. Threxnall's tone suggested it was anything but pleasurable. I'll enjoy watching reality educate you, human. I'm sure you will. Winona finally managed to extract herself from most of the cubs, though Nyx still held her hand. One question, though. Where's the training area where I won't be interrupted every 5 minutes by instructors who think yelling is the same as teaching? The silence was ice cold. Felnax cleared her throat. Sector 5 is currently unused. It has full facilities. Perfect. Winona shouldered her backpack, then looked down at the 26 cubs watching her with expressions ranging from hope to confusion to cautious optimism. All right, everyone. New plan. We're going to learn how to be soldiers. But first, she grinned, we're going to learn how to be a team. Threxnall crossed all 4 arms. This will end in disaster. Probably, Winona agreed cheerfully, but at least it'll be an interesting disaster. She started walking toward Sector 5, and without any order being given, all 26 cubs followed her like she was the Pied Piper, leaving Threxnall and Krillmoth standing alone in the drill yard, watching their entire class abandon them for a human who'd been there less than an hour. This is unprecedented, Krillmoth observed. This is humiliating, Threxnall corrected. That too. They stood there for a moment longer, watching the human and the cubs disappear around a corner. She's going to fail, Threxnall said, but he sounded less certain than before. Probability suggests yes, Krillmoth agreed, his compound eyes whirring as they refocused. But humans have a curious history of defying probability. Not this time. Perhaps not. But neither of them moved, and neither of them looked away from where Winona and the cubs had vanished, and neither of them was quite as confident as they pretended to be. Because the thing about humans, the thing that made them simultaneously fascinating and frustrating to the rest of the galaxy, was that they had this annoying habit of caring when caring seemed illogical. And in a universe that ran on logic and hierarchy and established protocols, caring was a wild card nobody quite knew how to predict. The night march began at 2200 hours under an artificially darkened sky. 20 kilometers of hostile terrain stretched ahead, terrain that broke most recruits. Threxnall stood at the starting line, all 4 arms crossed. The passing rate is 20%. Most of you will fail. This is expected. This is the part where you try to psych them out, Winona interrupted cheerfully. But here's the thing, Commander. These cubs don't fail. Not anymore. She turned to her cubs. This course is designed to be impossible alone. Good thing you're not alone. Trust your training. Trust your squad. Trust yourselves. Together, Vel said, his scales shifting to determined blue. Together, the other cubs echoed like an oath. Begin! The first hour tested their endurance. Steep climbs that required teamwork. Narrow passages where cubs helped each other through. The instructors monitored from remote observation points, waiting for the inevitable collapse. They are maintaining formation, Krillmoth observed, antennae twitching. Unexpected. Early stages, Threxnal dismissed. Wait until the gorge section. That's where they'll scatter. But at the gorge, a 30-meter gap crossed by a rope bridge designed to hold 3 individuals. Maximum. The cubs didn't scatter. Previous classes had panicked here, every cub attempting solo crossings that ended in falls and abandonment. The cubs stopped and conferred. Nyx gestured animatedly. Vel nodded. Umba examined the bridge supports. After 2 minutes, they split into groups of 3. Each group crossed carefully, while those who'd made it secured the far side, reducing sway, calling warnings about loose boards, celebrating when everyone crossed safely. They cleared the gorge in 15 minutes. The record was 43 minutes. In the command center, Threxnal's scales bristled. A fluke. But it wasn't a fluke. At hour 4, automated drones descended. The simulated enemy attack designed to create chaos. This was where recruits scattered, self-preservation overriding everything else. The drones had never failed to break a formation. The cubs formed a defensive circle. Not perfectly. Tixa was a half-second slow. One reptilian cub nearly tripped. But they did it. Each cub covered a sector, stronger ones protecting smaller. Everyone calling targets. Contact, Sector 3. Covering right. Umba, stay center. You're our medic. I'm on it. Everyone okay? They held formation for 3 minutes while drones circled, probing for weaknesses. When one cub's shield flickered, 2 others shifted to cover the gap. When Nyx got clipped by a stun round and stumbled, Vel was there instantly, dragging him back into formation. The drones, programmed to exploit individual weakness, couldn't find a way in. They disengaged and retreated, protocol when targets proved too difficult. The cubs held formation 30 seconds longer, then collapsed the circle, immediately checking each other for injuries, redistributing equipment. On the monitors, nobody in the command center spoke. The cubs reorganized and pushed forward. Together. Hour 6 brought the wall, exhaustion, dehydration, mental fatigue. This was where most cubs hit their breaking point. This was where the 20% completion rate came from. This was where recruits gave up. The cubs collapsed in a clearing for their scheduled rest break, breathing harsh and ragged. They will not continue, Threxnal predicted. They have pushed too hard. They will fragment now. Buddy checks, Nyx called out, his voice tired but steady. Everyone find your partner. Make sure they're good. The cubs paired off, Winona's system where each cub had a designated partner to monitor. They checked hydration, treated blisters, shared energy rations. The stronger cubs helped weaker ones stretch cramping muscles. Umba, designated medic despite being one of the youngest, wobbled from cub to cub with a first aid kit, applying blister treatments and checking for heat exhaustion. When Nyx found Vel's scales damaged by ill-fitting boots, raw patches showing where they'd chafed, he pulled out an adhesive bandage and carefully applied it. You didn't have to? Yeah, I did. You carried my pack for 2 kilometers when I was tired. This is what we do." Nix's ears twitched in what might have been a smile. "We take care of each other." In the command center, Winona had to blink rapidly several times. After 10 minutes, the cubs stood, reformed their column, and pushed forward. Together. The environmental zone was designed to break minds. Temperature extremes from freezing to scorching, zero visibility, audio disruptors playing screams and combat sounds to shatter concentration. This was where isolation became unbearable, where cubs were supposed to panic, separate, give up. The cubs entered in formation, but within minutes the conditions took their toll. Cold hit first, then heat, then darkness. Cubs stumbled, lost sight of each other, called out in panic. "Stay together!" Vel shouted as the world became chaos. "I can't see. Where is everyone? Sound off! Everyone sound off! Here! 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 I've got Tixa! Umba? Umba?" A moment of panic, then. "I'm here! I'm okay! Just very wobbly!" They regrouped through sound alone, following voices, calling names, refusing to leave anyone behind. When they found each other, they physically linked, hands on shoulders, tails wrapped around waists, whatever worked for their species. They moved through the environmental zone as one connected organism, no one allowed to drift away. 1 hour to clear a zone with a 93% separation rate. "Impossible," Krillmoth whispered, his antennae completely still. They emerged exhausted, battered, but intact. All 26 of them. The final kilometer should have been simple, but the cubs were running on pure determination now, exhaustion etched into every movement. When one stumbled, 4 helped. When another's gear failed, the squad redistributed the load. 300 meters from the finish, little Nix, who'd been struggling for the past hour, finally collapsed. "Leave me," he gasped. "Just finish. You can make it." "Not a chance," Bell said firmly. 6 cubs moved immediately. 2 took Nix's gear. 2 supported him on either side. 2 scouted ahead, clearing the path. "We cross together," an avian cub declared. "That's the rule." "That's not a rule." "It is now." They carried Nix the final distance, all of them taking turns, sharing the weight, refusing to leave anyone behind. All 26 crossed the finish line at the exact same moment. 7 hours, 42 minutes. The previous record for full class completion was 9 hours, 18 minutes. Most classes never had full completion at all. For a long moment, silence. The cubs stood swaying with exhaustion, holding each other up, too tired to celebrate, but too relieved to care. Then they saw Winona waiting in the light, and something broke. Nix started crying first, tears of exhaustion and relief. Then Vel's scales shifted to a shimmering emotional rainbow. Then Umba was wobbling rapidly toward her, and suddenly all 26 cubs were moving, surrounding her, everyone trying to hug her at once. "You did it," Winona said, laughing and crying. "I knew you would. You magnificent disaster children, you actually did it." Threxnal approached slowly, all 4 arms hanging at his sides. He looked at the cubs, at Winona, at the timer displaying that impossible number. "I do not understand," he said finally, his voice holding no scorn, just genuine confusion. "How?" Winona extracted herself from the cub pile long enough to face him. "You trained them to survive alone, to be hard, to never show weakness." She gestured to the exhausted, celebrating cubs. "I trained them to survive together, to be strong for each other, to know that asking for help isn't weakness. It's how you win." "The statistics," Krillmoth observed, his compound eyes whirring, "suggest your methodology is superior." Felnax stepped forward, her expression carefully diplomatic but her eyes bright. "Lieutenant Winona, I formally request you extend your assignment and implement these methodologies across all programs." "I'd be honored, Commander." Threxnall's scales shifted uncomfortably, but he nodded. "Perhaps humans are more formidable than I assessed." "We have our moments," Winona said diplomatically. 3 months later, the Cubs graduated top of their class. More importantly, they graduated as a unit, as friends, as a family forged in mud and mutual support. Nyx, the little scared phoenix who'd cried in the mud that first day, gave the graduation speech, standing tall, confident, surrounded by his squad. When Winona finally had to leave, temporary assignment over, new posting waiting, the Cubs refused to let her go without a proper farewell. She found herself buried under 26 aliens, all talking at once, pressing small gifts into her hands, making her promise to write, to visit, to never forget them. "As if I could," she said, her voice rough. "You guys are stuck with me forever now." That's how human pack bonding works. "Promise you'll come back?" Nyx asked, holding her hand tight. "I promise." As she headed for the transport, 26 voices called out behind her in chorus. "We love you, Lieutenant Winona!" She turned, waved, and had to wipe her eyes before boarding. Because here's the thing about humans, the thing that makes them simultaneously the most dangerous and most necessary species in the galactic community. They care when caring seems illogical. They care when told not to. They care even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. Because that's what humans do. They form bonds with strange alien children in military academies. They teach vulnerability as strength. They prove that the scariest thing in the universe isn't superior firepower or advanced tactics. It's someone who refuses to let you face the darkness alone. The humans walked in with their dinosaur bandages and unshakable belief that every life mattered, that every person deserved kindness, that the strongest squads were built on trust instead of fear. They changed everything through the simple, revolutionary act of giving a damn. And in a universe running on logic and protocol and established hierarchy, that was the most dangerous weapon of all. 5 years later, the newest class of recruits arrived to a very different galactic military academy. Training was still demanding, but instructors now learned names within the first week. Squad bonding exercises were mandatory. Mental health counselors were available, and every recruit received a small first aid kit on their first day. Some even had dinosaur bandages. In the Hall of Honor, Class 2247 had their names inscribed. The first trained under the Winona Protocol. All 26 names were there, because they'd all made it. Together.